Hello and welcome back to the course Private Pilot Maneuvers. Today we'll discuss soft field takeoffs. The last time we heard about short field takeoffs. What I meant by that is a short field that is paved, that has a paved surface. And today we'll talk about non-paved surfaces. Most commonly this is grass, but it can also be gravel, dirt, snow even. All those takeoffs are soft field takeoffs. Of course, a soft field takeoff can also be a short field takeoff. Then you're really limited with your performance. You should really check your takeoff performance. So everything applies that I told you about in the short field takeoff lesson. Now with a soft field, however, it's even harder to assess your takeoff performance because many pilot operating handbooks do not give you direct values to use, for example, a takeoff on grass. So let's say your grass is 5 centimeters high, or it's 10 centimeters high. It's wet, it's dry. So how much longer is your takeoff wall then compared to a paved surface? Now, most often there is no information found in the handbook. You can just use some general guidelines. Just be aware that if it's really a high grass you're dealing with, your takeoff distance could easily be extended by maybe up to 50% in the worst case. So those soft fields, especially high grass, of course, they're creating a lot of drag. And this is really making our takeoff roll a lot longer, depending on the actual condition. So always consider this and really establish the actual condition of the field before. So it might even be necessary, if it's a grass strip, for example, to walk the strip. Just make sure that there's no traffic, of course. In most cases this will be an uncontrolled field. But to really step on the runway and feel yourself with your feet and maybe hands over the length of the runway what the condition is. How tall is the grass, for example? Is it wet? Is the ground very soft? So this would be, of course, even worse if you have, after some rain, you have soft ground, high grass. Then your takeoff distance can be considerably increased. Just keep that in mind. Always use all information from the handbook and then apply some really nice margins to that. Also, just like in the short field takeoff, before departure, check if the conditions are still valid for your takeoff performance. So, do you still have a headwind, for example? Is the temperature the same? Is the grass longer than you anticipated? And so on. Now, the technique for a soft field takeoff actually, the target of that is to leave the surface as fast as possible, because we want to avoid the drag of the rough surface. So we want to get into the air as soon as possible. And to do that, the technique is a bit different than in a normal or in a short field takeoff. Some things, of course, are the same, like be sure you have your correct flap setting, your correct mixture setting at a high altitude airport, and that you have completed simply all pre-departure checks. Then, contrary to the short field departure on a paved runway, ideally you should not stop as soon as you have, or after you have entered the runway. So do all your checks, do all your run-up checks, have everything completed. By the way, for the run-up check, of course, you should find an area on a grass field, for example, that is ideally paved, of course, or well, as clean as possible. Otherwise, the run-up might quite throw some stones, or the propeller might throw some stones on the airplane. So when you've completed everything, all checklists and so on, check if you have clearance. In most cases, this would be an uncontrolled field. So check for traffic. And if you're really sure that you've done everything and that you can do your takeoff now, start to move onto the runway and immediately start your takeoff roll. Because if you stop on soft ground, it will take a lot of power to get going again. So you should really already take this taxi speed into the takeoff roll, for example. And then apply a substantial amount of back pressure. It's a bit depending on experience how much you actually need. Apply back pressure. And then add power as usual to your takeoff power setting. And then as soon as the speed is building up, when you have a considerable amount of back pressure on the yoke or stick, the nose will start to rise pretty rapidly. Then it's important to release a little bit of the back pressure because we don't want to lift off too early. So if the nose is coming up pretty quickly, then just release the back pressure so that the nose still stays up, but it's not that excessively high. And then you just keep it there. And you wait in this attitude until the airplane actually lifts off. In this phase, it's also important to remember that you need a lot of right rudder because the nose is so high up in the air. This is often forgotten. Okay, and then you wait until you lift off. And in this configuration and in this attitude, the airplane will lift off earlier than usual. And it will do so because it's in ground effect. We've talked about ground effect in the last lesson. This is a condition that's valid roughly above until a height that corresponds to the wingspan of the airplane. So when the airplane will lift off pretty early, and that's good because then we're getting out of the soft surface, we have less drag. But we are still too slow to actually fly out of ground effect. So it's important then to get the nose down a little bit, stay in ground effect a few feet above ground, and only then, when you have gained enough flying speed, which would normally be Vx at least, then you pull out of ground effect and fly away, and then it's just the same as in a short field departure, depending on obstacles behind the runway and so on. All right, so do not pull the airplane out of ground effect too early. We have discussed that problem already in the short field takeoff lesson. This is a bit tricky to do at first, to fly a really nice short field takeoff, but it will get easier with experience. Let's talk as a conclusion about some of the common errors during that procedure. First of all, the first error is the one you see just in that image. So trying to pull the airplane out of ground effect too early. Also to try to let it rotate too early, so to have the nose too high, so that the airplane will then lift off way too early and probably settle back onto the runway. What's a very common mistake, according to my experience, is that right rudder is neglected. Especially if you have not much experience. This is quite a lot to do. You have to, most students, flight students, when they try this for the first times, they are very concerned with having the nose at the right position on the horizon, so establishing the correct attitude and then wait for liftoff, which of course is important, but they often forget that they also still need to keep directional control. And as the nose is very high, the airplane is really wanting to turn to the left, so remember to apply enough right rudder. This is even harder because as the nose is so high, you have a bad visibility over the nose. So really use all references available to keep the nose pointing straight. Another common mistake is not completing the departure checks, so trying to take off without flaps, for example. And to have an incorrect evaluation of the actual takeoff surface. So as I've said before, you really need to know what the surface is like, and if it's necessary, take a walk up and down the runway. Again, check for traffic, of course, to make sure that the surface is actually what you expected during your takeoff performance calculations. All right, this sounds pretty interesting, right? So I'd say enough talking. Let's head out to the airplane and try this. I see you there.